Well, welcome everyone. I hope lunch was wonderful. It's a great way to digest by attending. Recreation in the forest economy, that's what we'll be chatting about. Before we dive in though, we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Abby Long. I'm the Executive Director for the Kingdom Trail Association. That's a nonprofit 100+ mile trail network up in the Northeast Kingdom, Caledonia and Essex counties. And we're a landowner ourselves. We're dependent actually on 105 private landowners to make our trails possible, but Kingdom Trails is really proud to have over 400 acres in conservation with the Vermont Land Trust. So we are also responsible landowners. I brought my foresters in tow. But Claire, would you like to also introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Claire Polfus. I'm the Recreation Program Manager for the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation. I work statewide on recreation policy planning and partnerships. So I get to work both on and off public lands with a whole bunch of recreation partners as well as private landowners and town municipalities. We also run our recreation grants program out of our recreation program, which provides funding for both conservation and recreation.
I'm Ryan Kilborn. I'm a consulting forester with Meadows and Timberlands. I work with Kingdom Trails Association in Abbey and various other people up in that region. And we're just here to talk about our experience with timber sale we had 2 winters ago now. And that went fortunately very well. And yeah, happy to share.
My name is Luke McNally. I'm the Champlain Region Forester for the Rough Grouse Society. And I worked out of a cooperative agreement with the Vermont NRCS on primarily on habitat restoration and enhancement projects on private lands. So I do a lot of outreach and recruitment of landowners to implement conservation projects on private land and then help walk them through the process of applying for funding with NRCS. We do a little bit of work on public land as well, which is kind of near and dear to my heart as a public landowner. Yeah, public land, why not? I guess occasionally you get tapped to do things like this that fall under the other duties as assigned. Education, yes. So I feel like I kind of default to the conservation mindset, but my organization was originally started as a hunting organization focused on habitat conservation, but representing that demographic and wearing that hat today.
The fun stuff, Luke. So we are going to talk at you a little bit. We hope that's okay, share some stories, but we actually have some questions queued up to really engage with you guys later. So hopefully the after lunch hour doesn't settle in too much and we can
keep it cold.
Yeah, that's true. It was cool actually.
And maybe we ought to tell our neighbors to quiet down.
You can have microphones over there.
Yeah. You could send me over.
So as I shared, we're going to be chatting about recreation in the forest economy, and you all, I hope, know by now about the Forest Future Strategic Roadmap. I mean, this conference last year helped actually formulate that. I was really honored, proud to serve as the outdoor recreation voice on that advisory panel. I think that's really profound that the legislators deemed that voice to be at the table. There were 5 pillars in that strategic roadmap. We're not going to dive into all of them, of course. We're really going to focus on pillar 5, which was the last one, the forest economy in Vermont communities. And that pillar really focused on protecting and enriching the positive impact of the forest economy on the communities that are embedded in the Vermont forest landscape. And overarching strategies for that pillar included building stronger linkages between the forest users and the forest product sector, as well as imagining the forest community of tomorrow. And you all know, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but Vermont's, called the Green Mountain State for a reason. What's the statistic is like 75% of Vermont is forested. And Vermonters and visitors alike, we really truly do value our forests. For the environmental and the cultural and even the economic benefits. And one of the examples I like to use is sawmills. back in the heyday, there were sawmills and communities popped up around them. They really served as the hub of the community. They were the economic engine. They provided jobs, selling resources, and there was, of course, we all know, a decline in sawmills, and the communities seemed to decline with them. But there's still communities there. And so how can we reinvest or revitalize them, give them that extra oomph that they may need? And I can only speak to the area I'm from, Burke. I always hear these stories from the old timers that Burke had a sawmill in it that it's famous for, I can't even believe I'm saying this all out, it's famous for creating the wooden toilet seats all for World War II. Like they would ship them over to Europe, and that was like Burke's claim to fame. Obviously that doesn't exist, but after the decline of those sawmills, East Burke especially was what I've been told was a ghost town. Outdoor recreation caught on, clearly. Kingdom Trails is world-class experience, but we still value our forest industry. And now I love sharing the story about the sawmill right in the center of East Burke. Mike Mathers is the logger, and he owns Mike's Tiki Bar. So right in the hub of East Burke, he has his tiki bar. There's about 200 cars parking for Kingdom Trails. He's got food trucks, he's got music at night. Obviously you can get a beverage, and on the back of that tiki bar is a sawmill, still active. There's also parking for VAST in the winter. So it's right in downtown, and it's a meeting place and a gathering place. I have meetings there during the day for work. It's there for all to enjoy. And so it's a special spot, and I think we can do more to that. I think that can really help be one of the vehicles that helps those sawmill communities of yesterday become still sawmill communities of today. So the Vermont Forest Future Strategic Roadmap, it provides a vision for how towns can maintain that strong forest culture and take advantage of the many ways that the forests contribute to the economy and well-being. If you go into the report, there's like a ton of different action items, and we're not really going to go through every single one of them. But for right now, we're going to be focusing on the strategy that elevates the positive impact the forest economy has on communities across the state. Forest connect all our communities, providing environmental, recreational, cultural, economic benefits, and sustainable forest management supports wildlife, forest product business owners, cultural traditions, and of course recreation, why we're here today. So before we dive into some of those case study stories that we're going to share of where outdoor recreation and the forest industry complement each other, the synergy they have with each other, we're going to pump the brakes a little bit and just talk solely about recreation. Because it's pretty cool. Simultaneously, while the state was doing the Forest Future Roadmap, the state has also been doing the Move Forward Together Vermont process, which is also housed in FPR and VOREC, Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative. And Claire is gonna take it from there.
I have some slides to keep me on task. As Abby mentioned, Move Forward Together Vermont is a collaborative process between FPR and the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative. And what we're doing is putting together a statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan and then action steps to implement it. It's like very similar to the Forest Future Roadmap. It's also similar to things like the Wildlife Action Plan and the Forest Action Plan, because it stems from the federal government saying, states, you need a plan, we're only going to give you money if you tell us how you're going to use it. So what Move Forward Together Vermont is this synergy between that, the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan and the VOREC action plan. The SCORP, I underlined it so you see where the funny word SCORP comes from, is required to be updated every 5 years in order to receive land and water conservation funding, and we also use it for our recreational trails fund. So we have to do this in order to keep getting money that goes out to Vermont communities. And in that, we have to have an inventory of what is available for people to get outside, what they want more of, and how we would close that gap. The VOREC action plans, the VOREC is the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative, and it was formed by executive order in 2017 by Governor Phil Scott, and it is working as a collective impact network with people in the industry of outdoor recreation, like people who are manufacturing goods, people who are providing services, people like Bolton who are providing opportunities, as well as the public and private landowners, nonprofit trails organizations, working all together to boost the whole outdoor recreation economy. And part of that executive order was to create an action plan. It was last done in 2018. A lot has changed since 2018, and so there was a need for an update, and we decided to pool our resources together to create a much bigger, broader plan than we could have alone. So how are we doing this? Like, first of all, we have committees that made up of people from across the state. The VOREC Steering Committee, which is an ongoing committee, is appointed by the governor, and again represents all those parts of the outdoor recreation economy that I went through. We did an ad hoc committee. This is governance for committees. Let's be clear. So,
Committees and acronyms.
yeah, committees and acronyms. Like if you saw my name and where I'm from on the agenda, you knew this was coming. Committees and acronyms. The SCORP Technical Advisory Committee goes a little more into the weeds of all the types of outdoor recreation. So we're not talking about trails here. We are talking about trails, but we're also talking about town parks. We're also talking about water access. We're talking about fishing and hunting. We're talking about motorized and non-motorized recreation. It's anything from going to a town park and working on a community garden, or going to an outdoor concert with your family, to backpacking the entire long trail. Everything in between. So that comprehensive part of the SCORP, it's really comprehensive and it takes a lot of work. So the committees are helping us do this process, and then the staff are me, the recreation program manager, and then VOREC as a program manager, and we have support from the National Park Service Rivers and Trails Conservation Assistance Program, as well as a contractor CRO, Moderator and Presenter, which is based out of Burlington and has helped us with surveys. So we're in this process of information gathering, information synthesis, getting more public feedback, creating the report, and then implementing. And where are we right now? We're right in the middle. We gathered a whole bunch of data, information from people across the state, and we're currently drafting, like by currently I mean like this morning I saw a draft, and tomorrow I'll see another draft of our vision and priorities, which will go out to public feedback in July. As part of the information that we collected, and I think is like relevant to how we think about how recreation and the forest economy can work together, we did two different survey methods for the same survey. We had a panel survey, which is a statistically representative survey of all Vermonters. So you can say we can say with a 95% confidence that this many Vermonters like to do whatever kind of activity. That's like a randomly sampled or restricted sample, technically, survey. We've never had this before. This is really exciting. The other thing we did was the same survey, but we opened it up to anyone who was interested. People are really interested in outdoor recreation. We got 1,800 responses to that survey, and it was a long-ass survey. So it's pretty impressive. And so this gives people the chance to give us feedback who really care and who recreate a lot. We also did a survey through our partnership with the Vermont Recreation and Parks Association to do a survey of the people providing recreation. So those are recreation departments in towns, as well as the nonprofit trails groups. And then we're also doing an outdoor recreation business survey. And I'm not going to go into all of the data from the survey because extensive and it's not quite ready yet either. But the important thing that we found was that outdoor recreation is really important to Vermonters. 93% of Vermonters, like I said, we can confidently say about that many recreate at least once per year. They go outside at least once. And then, you know, almost 90%, it's more than that. So people really care. They want to be outside. They want to be outside in their communities. You can see it like with the open web survey, people were much more actively outside as expected. These are the people who are really engaged in the community. But I think that's a bigger number than most other states get, just like for reference. And then why? So why do people go outside? And the number one reason for both surveys was to improve their mental health. So the wellness of our communities is part of this whole conversation, like Abby was saying, of like the vitality and importance of our communities. People going outside, it's really important for their mental health. Of course, like physical health is in the top 10 as well, but I think it's just a really important point with what we know is a health crisis in our country. The other thing that we did was focus groups. We wanted to get more nuanced information than you can get from a widely distributed survey. So these were our goals of the focus groups. We had 185 participants from 123 organizations. You can see like the dispersing of the different types of organizations from all across the state. They were either invited by us or by our partners. So these were like small group discussions. They certainly aren't comprehensive, but we definitely missed people. The 4 questions we asked are up there. Really was getting to say, like, okay, so here's outdoor recreation. Like, where can we move in the next 5 years? Like, what opportunities are out there? What's stopping us from achieving those opportunities? So how does this all link together? So, like I said, like, how people are outside is intrinsically linked to the forest economy because, like Abby said, Vermont is forested and people want to be out there. And we also want to support wood products, we want to support the forest economy. And how can we have them work together? Because they're both so intrinsically linked to the vitality of our communities. So, as I said, this Move Forward Together Vermont process is very similar to the Forest Futures Roadmap with like a different focus, but a lot of overlap. The priorities in the roadmap are kind of used as like similar to the focus group, like for the forest industry, like what we had like this great resource of like what really matters to people in the forest industry, and that was really important. And it's the cool thing, and like I said, we're in drafting, but like this focus on community and focus on access is emerging as a really high priority for the process, just like it did for the Forest Futures Roadmap. So like I said, tons of synergy. So as I said, we are gathering public feedback on what we come up with for this draft vision and priorities. There will be a online component, and we'll also be having a couple of community, like in-person community events, as well as probably one virtual. So there's going to be virtual, like on forum online, there's going to be virtual like webinar, and then there's going to be a couple community events in July. If you're interested, go to our website, which is also the QR code, or email me, and we can get on the email to give us more feedback on what we say. Are there any like questions about Move Forward Together Vermont before we get into the?
So ski areas, are they part of this whole?
Yep, skiing is outdoor recreation. Like I said, it's like quite comprehensive.
Okay.
Yeah, and they've been engaged in some of the focus groups.
I think I covered. And she's not going anywhere.
No, I'm still here.
She's gonna ask questions later on too. So that was an awesome overview of what the state's keeping their pulse on for recreation. And now, of course, that's why we're all here. We want to see how that starts to immerse itself into the forest product sector. But there's like no official way, there's no BMPs here, there's no like toolkit yet for that, yet. Keyword is yet, because that's the gold line. So what we're gonna do is actually have Brian and Luke share some stories. You know, that's what we have available right now, and then afterwards, after listening to them and maybe from your own experiences, we can start to talk about together what are, you know, we also recognize it's not all rainbows and unicorns when those two industries do cross paths. Talk about conflicts or how we communicate, what improvements we can make, learning from experiences. So, Brian?
Yeah, so I'll walk you through kind of some of the things that we talked about and did, and maybe even talk about some things we didn't do, maybe we should have. But going into it, like we knew it's Kingdom Trails, right? Thousands of people use these trails every year, all over the place. So we knew we were going to be a lot of eyes on whatever we did. So we kind of identified, yeah, they got summer, which is very high use, and they still got winter use, but less so in summer. So we decided to do a winter sale. So as part of that, we really identified the different trail networks that we're going to be interfacing with. And there are some trails that are being used more than others as main corridors. So walking with the trail manager at Kingdom Trails, you know, we identified what trails can we actually use. Like there's obviously going to be trails that are immediate impact, they're going to be primary access. So how do we make improvements on those, or what do we want to do with them? And what trails are like kind of off limits, and what trails, you know, there's going to be some impact, but we can fix it. So we did that. We came up with a good game plan for access. Then we started, it was my job to start doing the layout. So I started doing layout, and then once we had some layout that people could see it, so it was like, well, we got to get this out in front of us just starting, and people just seeing equipment roll in. So we did a pre-harvest walk that we advertised to the whole community, and not every situation is going to be like this where you get Kingdom Trails to work with you, who have people that do social media, have access to newspapers, and, you know, can really do the outreach. This was very fortunate that we could do this. But we provided a post-harvest walk where, remember, a pretty good chunk of people came. We had, you know, it went out to a lot of people, and we walked, looked at trails. We talked about, you know, what the impact's going to be. You know, what the goals of the harvest are going to be, you know, why is there going to be openings here, what are some of the areas that are going to be most impacted. A lot of questions came up, but I think it gave folks a really good opportunity to voice their opinion and get a good sense of that, you know, we're here to work with Kingdom Trails in the recreation. This isn't just about going and logging. So we want to hear some feedback.
This was done on private land, like all the Kingdom's trails are on private land?
This one was private land, but Kingdom Trails was the landowner. Then it didn't go over parcel, property lines, it stayed within our land.
Okay. Yeah, so they own a couple hundred acres, and this scale covered probably about 70, 75 acres. But some pretty highly used trails that, you know, very rich northern hardwood site, and some of it beautiful, you know, downhill, single track that people are using every day.
I don't want to jump ahead with questions, but what was the motivation for the sale?
So in the management plan, you know, part of the goals of Kingdom Trails was to generate some income, wildlife habitat, just letting the public know that forestry is important to them, and that it's part of the community, and that it's a resource that everyone should, you know, use. And that a lot of these trails are there because there's historical skid trails in place. So
We were founded on that.
yeah, so it's kind of all wrapped up into that. And then
So the hiking trails.
yeah, yep. And but so yeah, so once we had the, you know, the pre-harvest walk, the harvesting started. We did offer an active harvest tour, at least of the committee. That's pretty much who came, the Kingdom Trails committee, and that was great. They took some videos. They got that on Instagram and Facebook, And let me just say, through this whole process, I don't think we had one negative encounter or feedback.
It was awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, and so this happened the winter of 2022 and 2023. So thank God not last winter, but that winter wasn't a
Not
peach.
great either.
It wasn't great either. And we got real fortunate. Well, we picked a good crew. We had a mechanized crew that was very highly recommended, and for better or worse, they're a type of crew that can come in and get stuff done. So we had a very short stretch of window where they were available. We got cold weather. We got in there and we got the work done. Now, initially, what we were going to try to do, I think it's really important to be flexible in all this, is that initially we were going to try to like log half of it, keep half the trails open, then move over and log the other half and keep and get those trails back open, because they did winter grooming, skiing, and fat biking. But the way the winter was, is just we needed to take we had cold weather, we needed to focus on the wet areas, and we needed to get things frozen as best we could. So we ended up closing all the trails for the most part. I think they said and we had a vast trail that went through, but because of the poor winter, the vast trail wasn't open. But I think only once or twice they said some people came down and were biking around, and very, very little not interference, but people respected that the trails were closed. So then, the harvest happened. Everything went really well. A few hiccups, but we worked through everything. And then we offered a post-harvest walk, which very few people attended.
I think it was pouring rain.
Yeah, it was pouring rain.
It's not ideal.
But I think leading up to that point, people heard about it, had the chance to see it, and were comfortable with it to begin with. And part of that harvest too that we were able to broadcast out is we sought out we cut about 6,000 feet of hemlock logs that got left behind for Kingdom Trails to saw out and use on their trail system. So we're able to put some wood products right back into the property.
That's probably my favorite story that came out of this harvest was the hemlock. It was, milled, processed right on site on the land, and our trail crew took it, and we were able to make bridging all around our trail network, because we've actually been doing an overhaul of bridging. Some of our bridges were this narrow. I was petrified to even cross them, but we've been turning a lot of our trails into adaptive trails. So the adaptive mountain bikes, the 3-wheelers, are now able to go access more of our trail network because the bridges are wider, and that all came from that harvest. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and we also, as part of the sale, we improved the access road that was eroding. We got some more material in there and water bar properly. And then, so all in all, I think the takeaway from this was just outreach and communication. So I guess the pros and cons of doing all this, the cons is it's more time, right? I mean, I'm out there trying to host 3 different walks and meetings and meeting with the committee and all that good stuff. But, it was important to Kingdom Trails Association. So, it all worked out. But I think the overall pros is that at a time when logging is really being faced with challenges from a lot of anti-loggers, that this had a lot of eyes on it. A lot of people get to see it the next summer, and it exposed people to logging in a good way. And I think it's a great opportunity with the amount of recreation that's going on in the state to showcase good work and how it can be done properly and everyone can coexist. So.
Just to add, 75% of Kingdom Trails trail users are coming from out of state, the majority in Massachusetts, New York areas. And I think it was just an opportunity, like Ryan said, they might not have been the ones attending the pre-post harvest walks that Ryan led, but we now have permanent signage out there that tells the story about the changing landscape and why it is the way it is and why we did choose to do it. And so that's somebody from Boston learning right then and there. It's not the Lorax, that's probably not okay to say, but it's, we are adding resiliency and life to our forests.
So who did the signage? How did you guys create that signage?
We did.
You guys, okay, because I think that's a huge thing, particularly, and I don't want to jump in, but Federal Forest Service, they don't do so well there. You know,
I want you to
they're
hold that thought.
slow movers.
Because there's, we'll end with talking about kind of next steps and that there are going to be some opportunities led by FPR that might bring a little bit more cohesiveness to, and having like a toolkit for that type of signage.
So this was done in the winter of 22-23.
Yeah.
So there was a whole season last summer of people riding. And did you hear feedback after that either at all? Or people like, what are they doing?
Right, because it's a pretty drastic change, but you know, maybe Burke Mountain's view is actually a little bit more beautiful.
We want to actually, made a little nicer view.
But there wasn't people like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that.
No, I think we did, like Ryan said, such a good job communicating and writing beautiful, you know, we took photos along the way, wrote beautiful articles, like when it culminated at the end, and people, I think were pretty excited to learn about it. And then our local community, who is, you know, my number one priority, that's who we serve, I think was honored because, you know, the kingdom's traditional industry is the forest industry. So the fact that it's still existing and being uplifted like this, and people, you know, we're pretty proud.
We're happy about it.
I'm willing to bet some people didn't notice, honestly.
Yeah.
One, you're kind of focused on the trail when you're riding, but two, when the job was done and the spring dried out,
Yeah,
they cleaned, what areas they had to fix the trails and clean up was done in less than a day. You know, just
right, they greened up pretty fast.
it's greened up fast.
And what kind of cutting was it? Complete or was it selective?
So we had made some openings in a few spots, but those openings weren't necessarily right on the trail. Probably the most highly used section of trails was a pretty nice northern hardwood stand where we just thinned it. But we took some pretty big trees out in a few spots, some small openings. Definitely noticeable, but it wasn't like, 40-acre patch cut that we're doing, you know, and having them right along the edge of it. So, but like Mike probably.
Send out in the middle.
So, but no, we were fortunate. Good crew, everyone was flexible, made it work, and turned out well.
Yeah, very grateful to Ryan. He led the way. It was awesome, and we learned a lot too.
Yeah, I mean, you had the right stuff to work with.
Good story.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah, because, you know, tell me when we can start talking.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, questions are great. You know, Luke's gonna share too, and then maybe something else will spark. Luke.
Yeah, thanks. So I think the hunting community and the forest management community have been friends for quite a while now. And I think before, you know, diving into why that is, I think it's worth just pointing out that in 2024, you know, faced with oftentimes mediocre forest conditions, forest management is a restoration tool, you know, independent of and irrespective of hunting and game species. So having a workforce to implement habitat management or just, you know, forest diversity and complexity is really important. But, you know, huntable species, game species in particular tend to be more disturbance dependent, right? So we're talking about young forests are particularly advantageous for species like grouse and deer and wild turkey and moose and cottontail rabbits and things of that nature. I always like to point out that there's a whole bunch of other species that also depend upon young forest habitats that you can't buy tags for, including examples like the green snake and the chestnut-sided warbler and the wood turtle. You know, so many different species, over 100 species of migratory birds in the Northeast utilize young forests for part or all of their life cycles. So it's definitely a very nuanced story and a very difficult story to tell, because I think we're always starting that conversation from a defensive point of view where people are saying, well, you just want to, you know, manage the forest and change the forest for the critters that you like to hunt so that you can shoot them. And that's a pretty difficult place to start a conversation from. So I still haven't quite figured out what's the best way to engage on this subject matter in a way that's thoughtful and persuasive even, but I do think that, you know, starting to, I certainly identify as a hunter. I'm loud and proud as a hunter. I also identify as a non-hunter. I like, you know, species of wildlife that you can't hunt, and I think, you know, conservation, land conservation as an interest kind of is my interest. I just so happen to also enjoy grouse hunting and deer hunting when it's seasonally appropriate, but you know, going into the realm of identity politics a little bit, I think it's always helpful for us to start out just by saying, like, I'm also a non-hunter, right? I do these non-hunting things that other non-consumptive recreational groups do, and I enjoy those things very much. So how do we even start those conversations with the public is challenging and problematic, and I think I'm always kind of just sort of asking more questions and providing answers perhaps, but it's definitely an ongoing conversation that we're having as we kind of embark through this future forest process. And you know, the SAF conference that we had, which was definitely a huge windfall for our community back in March. I think a really interesting part of the story that I like to think about a lot and dwell on a lot is, you know, the facts get thrown around that, you know, well, in pre-colonial times we had, you know, 90% or 80% old growth forests in New England. That's okay. That's a difficult place to start the conversation, right? So whether or not that's true, I think it might be true in some parts of the forest, certainly. In other parts of the forest, I think the conversation is much more nuanced. Native people managed valley bottoms, especially around river corridors and around the Champlain Valley and the Mohawk Valley and the St. Lawrence Valley, going back tens of thousands of years. I mean, humans caused the extinctions of several species of wildlife going back, 9,000-10,000 years. So obviously humans had an impact on the landscape before we started, commercial forest management with mechanized equipment in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And I think that's a really interesting place to start the conversation. Native people were clearing areas around their village sites and planting cornfields and, exhausting the soil and then moving those cornfields, and then those areas would regenerate into young forests that would go through the stages of succession and provide habitat for wildlife, including species of tasty wildlife that would be somewhat convenient for them to harvest, closer to their village sites. This stuff is hard to study, but there is some science around looking at, corn pollen and other, pollen fragments in sediment cores near, historic village sites. Really interesting stuff. So Native people were, managing the coast of Maine, right? 5-10 miles inland from the coast, the forest was burned for convenience, right? Because they wanted to use that area near the ocean, and so those habitats went through processes of succession or were, perpetually managed using fire. They've since kind of greened up into predominantly oak forest, which is indicative that they were managed, because oak is a disturbance-dependent species, and we probably see more late successional, northern hardwood or hemlock type cover types in those areas had they not been managed. The heath hen, right, used to be this species of game bird that lived along the coast, particularly around Boston. Went extinct because that forest ecosystem was no longer managed as, a young shrubby forest. Young shrubby forest, of course, young forests being areas that kind of put the food and the cover right in front of the face of wildlife species like, grouse and turkey and whatnot. So we definitely do a lot of outreach to hunting organizations and individuals that like to hunt and try to get folks to do management on their lands to increase wildlife diversity. Our primary vehicle for that is the NRCS funding, of course, but we do some work with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation as well to use grant funds to do work on public lands as well. You know, the hunting habitat, particularly here in the Champlain Valley, I think has decreased certainly quite a bit with a decrease in forest management and a kind of a decrease in the interest as, you know, the hunting community becomes smaller. But I think the hunting community kind of invented recreation in this country, if I could be so bold as to get away with saying that. We would. Well, I think we do. Feel free to disagree with me. You know, it was the hunting community, the Roosevelts and the Gifford Pinchos and the Rockefellers who first set aside Adirondack Park. And at that point,
Teddy Roosevelt was a hunter, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. At that point, we were recovering from way unsustainable land use, you know, too much logging, right? So somewhat ironically, all the rich folks, the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and whatnot, set up Adirondack Park to preserve that land so that they could go hunting there, much to the chagrin of the poor working class people that actually lived there and needed to use that land. And when the first hunting licenses first came out, you know, farmers were totally pissed about only regulating hunting to the fall because they needed to hunt here. Like, nobody has time to go hunting only in the fall, right? So now the times have changed so much, and hunting has kind of become more part of a working class identity and less so amongst, you know, people with means and stuff like that, which I think is a really interesting shift in, you know, recreation and values and stuff like that.
Does anyone have any questions for Luke before we ask you guys some questions?
Well, I was just, you know, following it. I mean, I started out when I was growing up. It was kind of, and I don't want to, is I was an avid hunter. You know, I lived and breathed for hunting season. Then, as I got older, I grew out of it for whatever reason and got more into the hiking, canoeing, and that side of things. And it might have been, I think a lot of it's got to do with the friends you keep and how you do whatever you do. But there is that segue between the two. And I think the challenge going forward is for the folks that come here for the recreation is understanding more about, you know, what else is making this place what it is right now, and how we can, as landowners, can, you know, get benefit both ways, you know.
Yeah, well, I actually was telling Ryan about complaining. I had a timber sale this past winter that butts town land and is used heavily for recreation by the neighbors, right? It's private land, so I didn't really have the vessel to communicate with them, like as Kingdom Trails does, right? And so sale went pretty well considering the winter, but like it wasn't ideal ground conditions. And like through one adjacent owner who was a client of mine, like I think a lot of the neighbors who used it to recreate through to town land are either don't understand anything about forest management or why the trails are wet even though they're closed out as well as we could to AMPs. You know, any of it, or that they need to just essentially like wait for them to dry out like later in the summer. And so I'm not really, I don't think this question really has an answer, because like I said to Ryan, because Ryan was like, well, public outreach, right? And I understand that, but like I also then responded, I don't really want to like be communicating with 20 neighbors via email, right? Like for a lot of reasons. And so, yeah, I don't know. And I've talked with this about, so this is more just a statement, I guess. I've talked with like Ali Kasiba, FPR, like, and Ethan Tapper was doing good outreach just to try to like educate some people, right? And it's like, because like a lot of people, because like this property hadn't really been cut in like 50 plus years, right? And so like people moved in there 20 years ago have never seen forestry equipment on it. So then it's a foreign use to them when all they've ever done is like walk their dog on it or bike through or whatever. And so it's not really a question, it's just.
Was the landowner someone who lived there or not?
He used to live there, but he's absentee.
Okay.
But he allows all this recreation, there's like single track mountain bike trails that have been built on his property, he doesn't care. You know, it's totally unposted, open to the public. He's on board with everything. And so I think he communicated with, but he doesn't even know everybody, right? Because it's in the town, it's in Morrisville, so it's like probably exploded in growth since he's lived there. So he knows a few of the people who've been there when he lived there. I'm sure he doesn't know most of the people that use his property. And so, yeah, it's just.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, Kingdom Trails, this example, like, is technically private land, but it's like kind of almost pseudo-public, right? Like, it's open to the public. Kingdom Trails is a like well-known organization that has public outreach. So it's like, yes, technically a private, not-for-profit, but it functions a little bit more like a town forest type would. But I think what you're saying, like where I see conflicts happening are like those situations, right?
Oh yeah, totally. Like I manage the expectations of my client,
Yes.
right? But then I don't have contact with all these other people that use his land.
They don't have like say, right? Like they.
Oh, totally.
No, but they do have opinions,
But they
and
have
they do
opinions,
share
like-
those opinions
I
quite.
mean, and certainly like on public where we get lots of opinions as well, but people do have like a part of the process and you can like say something, and I think people don't know enough about private lands, and I think that is another, like not just education about like what is timber management, like what does it mean to have like a selection harvest here and a patch cut there, and like how are those different, and like that's what's so great about that operation we did up there, because you can kind of see, like you can see if you look around outside of the trail, like you can see where it was selection. I lived there, so I know what they did and like where it was selection and where the patch cuts are. You need that education, but you also need the education about like this guy, your client, is like fully can like make these decisions, and like we need to respect that. Like the neighbors should respect that, because it's such a privilege for them to be able to bike or hike.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, in hindsight, maybe I could have set up a VWA woods walk, like pre and post harvest, but then I don't even have a way to communicate with those people, right? So how do I get the message to those direct people without knocking on doors?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, there's no real like, it's just tough because it's like, yeah, it's just interesting, right? It's something to chew on, and maybe I learned a little bit. And,
I think that, well, certainly, and I think the recreation community also can step in there, right? And like say like private, like when, like even have like little indications if they like, if it's a club that manages, it sounds like.
yeah, it's not, yeah, it's all
But
formal, yeah.
if it were a club, like they could have little signs that say.
Oh, totally.
private
Well,
land,
then I'd have
all
the
this-
metric, like, be like, okay, well, right, because like I'm gonna do a sale on town land at some point in my town, and we're gonna do, we've already talked about, like, in the plan, there's gonna be a pre-harvest walk and a post-harvest walk.
Yeah.
And then during, you know, like, and try to get as many people out there as possible, right, because it's like public land, whenever people use it for different things, and so, yeah, it's just kind of, it's, I don't wanna say it's an observation, it's just something to think about,
Yeah,
like,
I think that's.
I don't really know the path forward, because like, and without putting words in Ryan's mouth, like, I run into these conflicts more and more, right?
Well, I think
I'm
something-
not that old.
Not to jump off course, but I think something that we didn't do, because we're fortunate we had Kingdom Trails handle it, is that there are opportunities in the other partner with the groups. Like, I think we could have partnered with Ottawa. You know, we could have done something like that to get more outreach. Maybe you could have partnered with a local bike club, be like, hey, we're doing this sale, there's gonna be probably some kickback, and like to
Right.
at least show the club what's gonna happen. Maybe they could throw up some signs on their behalf, and then people are calling them, maybe they could settle things down.
Right, which honestly, I didn't think about, so
Yeah.
that's great, you know, yeah.
So,
And you're not off track, that is legitimately the question you're gonna ask, is what would be ideas to communicate, you know? And there are so many different levels of communication, the single private landowner to, you know, a big company that owns a bunch of land too, so.
I just sort of wonder if the thing that happened in Burke with the loss of trail access was a, you know, kind of a slap upside the head to a lot of the entitlement that happens there. And it highlighted the fact that this is private land, and this is how we do things here, and this is, you know, part of that whole thing. So I wonder if that made people more receptive and understanding, like, okay, this is not our land, like, this is, someone else's land. I don't know, I just sort of wonder if that.
I think it played into
If that
it.
helped
You know, we've
with that.
also buffered that, and it's funny, Kelsey's sitting right in the front row, because we, along with a bunch of other mountain bike networks from Maine to the Adirondacks, started Bike Borderlands, and
Ride of
they,
Gratitude.
Ride of Gratitude, that the Northern Forest Center houses. And, our unified voices together made that code of conduct really strong, and that code of conduct was everywhere throughout our trail network, but everywhere throughout that timber harvest, because one of the main pillars is to respect the land and the landowner. So I think having that tool, Ride of Gratitude, paired with everything in all of our communications, absolutely honed in, letting those trail users, visitors especially, know that it's not their right, it's a privilege.
Yeah, well, I think you're dealing with a stow credit, and I think that.
Well, yeah, it's essentially, it's not Stowe, it's right next to
Right.
There's a
Stowe.
lot of entitlement there.
Well, this is the challenge in general for, the different types, the different demographics of folks that are here now. 30 years ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation, or 40 years ago, that still would happen. And those people that were walking there, they would have understood that was what goes on. And now, for a whole lot of reasons, most of the people don't really have a good connection with what goes on. And I think what I'm thinking about is the signage, whether you're gonna have a harvest or whether you're on somebody's land, because most people don't even know,
Right.
they don't even know where they are. I mean, I got this great little app, what's it, Onyx, it's a hunting thing, shows those property lines, I'm always looking at it all the time. And so having access to signage that people can put, whether you're a logger or a landowner, I think that's I think in terms of if there's resources out there, because I know what a sign looks like, but I'm not much of a sign maker. But I know how to pound them in the ground.
Totally. This is great. So our questions were, what are conflicts? Can we identify them? What are areas of improvement? Communication, and then resources. So I'm just gonna throw my piece of paper off to the side because we're already hitting all those subjects. So I don't wanna, put us in a box. So I think this type of conversation is really great.
Yeah.
And valuable questions. And I can speak to the signage a little bit. We do have a marketing, graphics, someone well-versed in graphic design to help us, but we also have a forester and a trail advisory committee that we help, I don't know the correct verbiage to use for a timber harvest. I'm looking to these experts and the resources that are surrounding me to help create that for us. So we are reflecting the real story. And then, and I think, I don't know, that's the other thing, working with private landowners, they have to give you the thumbs up to even do signage in the first place. Because we even put pre-signage up there, letting people know this was going to happen this winter. So we caught them even ahead of time if they weren't paying attention to our social media or paying attention to our blog posts or coming to our pre-harvest walk. Then maybe they were riding by it. So that could be a tactic, but again, only if the land.
Well, yeah, some of it's too, maybe, because I was because I think it's mostly spring, summer, and fall use. I don't think there's, because it connects right into a mountain bike trail and town land. And so I was will it be closed out? We closed it out early this year, because it was dry. So I was so maybe just some of this in my head too. I was it's not, and I think it's all fine, but in my head, I was just I manage my landowners' expectations and all this other stuff. I was there's no one's gonna be on it in the winter, and so
As a trail manager also, and probably maybe you feel the same way, but rogue trails on private property is our nightmare. That's
Say that
you're
again.
not told road disease, okay? I know. So I guess he gives permission, but it's trails that aren't managed officially. If someone just built them on their own without being certified trail builder or having the permission of a landowner, that's what gets the rest of the trail networks around the state in trouble.
Yeah,
And so, that it's not a VIMBA chapter, Vermont Mountain Bike Association chapter. I think, you know, maybe that's a, you know, again, I don't know the actual situation. Clearly permission was given to use it, but it wasn't
Yeah,
part
the
of it.
landowner's like totally fine with people recreating the property, like he's happy for people recreating,
Yeah.
you know, and,
That's awesome.
and right, it's just like a few single track trails, and so there's really no impact. But yeah.
but it's nice to get asked.
It's pretty.
Right, yeah, but the counterpoint to that though, isn't there a law in the state of Vermont that you can, it's the vast law, right? That
They're
you can't
protected.
be held responsible for an injury that happens on your property if they're not given permission to be there, right? It's
Exactly,
something
yep,
like that.
correct. The private landowner is protected by state statute.
Right, from liability,
Mhm.
but, right.
Which kind of encourages.
Well, and that's if we want to talk about traditional Vermont laws or traditional Vermont values at least, is that land was open.
Yeah, right.
And,
But it's open.
it is, you're right, it is.
Everything's open.
Right, unless it's posted. Mhm. So any,
Yeah.
But that's not for building trails.
Right.
It's for
Well, right,
Well, what's the definition? You get a trail to get.
right, yeah,
You
but
just walk the same path several
Well,
times
yeah.
until it becomes one.
well, sometimes as a landowner, you, and this is our hunting friends, you know, they don't understand, you know, and I'll come across a hunting stand, you know, and, no name, no tag, no nothing, and I'm okay with that, it's particularly if they don't put those tree screws in, that bothers me a little more. But every once in a while, somebody will decide, well, they need to cut these shooting paths, you know, so they're out there, they cut the line, you know, so that part, and that's as much about the different clubs just getting that information, you know, and as a landowner, I'm pretty assertive about taking care of that. I took the ladder and I took it to my house and put a little note somewhere, and somebody came looking for their ladder and we had a conversation. That worked out. But I think try to get ahead of that with having access to you know, folks that, and I don't want to, is one perfect example was the Forest Service, National Forest Service, did some patch cuts over near Brandon Gap and along a pretty active, the Chittenden Brook. There's a hut up there and it was a beautiful trail goes up. And they did a bunch of patch cuts that were right along the trail, and they had a mark, but you know, they had the 3 dots, all that, you know, all the paint was on the trees, and I knew it when I was walking them, but Joe Q. Public didn't know what was gonna go, and then later on, when they did do the cutting, then friends of mine talked about coming down, all of a sudden, coming into this big, huge opening and being aghast. So that's where the Forest Service or the, you know, public lands people, if they can do just like what you guys did, that would make a lot of difference, you know.
absolutely. Any other conflicts?
I don't really, it's not a conflict, it's just a question, right? So this is what, the 3rd, 4th time that they've done this conference, and I feel like there's always this undertone of the pro-forestation movement and what our response is to that. And this is an interesting conversation here because I think that why you were so cautious going into this work in Burke was because it's a hypothesis on my part, but the values of the pro-forestation movement and the values of the mountain biking community overlap quite a bit. So I guess the question that I'm trying to come around to was how to respond to that, you know, and what is the right response. So my business is we sell lumber to homeowners and, you know, end users and stuff like that. And so we are faced with that question every now and then. And I don't have the best response to it, and I'm just sort of curious, you know, I've heard some stuff from you, but I've never been given a really, I guess, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. I wish I had a better answer, and I wish that there was someone in the state that could give us that response to the pro-forestation movement, because the sense I get from everyone that's here is that we understand that a working forest is good for the state, it's good for the environment, it's good for the economy, it's good for everything.
So what is the question though? Like, which is, like, what is, like, when you say the reforestation movement,
A
like, what
lot
is
of
the
people
question?
think that the best thing to do for our
It's not to
forest
do anything.
Is never cut a tree.
is let those trees grow, that's gonna save us.
Yeah,
But then if they're in there buying lumber from you,
They'd stop.
Yeah.
I
you know, and it's like, and I tell people, it's like, where do you want it to come from?
Yeah.
Right, cause like,
Right.
harvesting in New England is highly regulated, in Vermont even more so than surrounding states. And so it's like anything, if you push that resource, or we're gonna continue to build houses here, people are still gonna want nice hardwoods, they're gonna want nice furniture, right? So if you push that demand somewhere else, right, you don't know what the regulation is, if any.
Right.
Right, you don't know what the working conditions are, you don't know, like, okay, and take like tropical hardwoods as an extreme example, but like, is the wood stolen? Are people getting paid for it? Is there any sort of, you know, and so that's what I talk to people, that's like, if someone actually wants to educate themselves, it's like, well, where do you want it to come from? And, like, what do you want the impact to be?
Right, well, I think that's what you guys are doing.
That's one of the things we talked about in depth. It wasn't in pillar 5 in the strategic roadmap. It was in another pillar about PR, public relations for the forest industry in the state of Vermont. And I actually, as the outdoor rec voice, you know, raised my hand and was like, I think we can be your vehicle for that, or one of them, you know?
Sure.
But that example I shared about how our trailblazers are coming from out of state, they're coming from cities. This is sometimes, you know, they're coming, like, their sole experience in a, you know, forested area. And timber harvest. And we have private landowners every year that do a timber harvest. These signs are not just in this one example that Ryan shared about. We have them all over the place with the landowner's permission. And I see us as being helpful to the forest industry of helping get that message
Right.
out.
So we need to grow that.
And I don't think it's just Kingdom Trails, and I don't think it's just about like tourism-based recreation, like just going back to like our survey about people go outside, people wanna go outside. And so we need to show people that going outside and enjoying, like improving your mental health and enjoying nature isn't incompatible with forest, like the forest economy. And I also think one of the ways we manage recreation is called the recreation opportunity spectrum. And it's from the Forest Service, and it's about thinking about like, what does the user want to experience in this situation? And like you go to a town park or like, you know, like the Burlington waterfront, like your experience is pretty, like, it's outside, you're experiencing the breeze off the lake, but it's pretty like built. It's a built environment in which you're also experiencing outdoors versus like, you know, going on the Skyline Trail in the Worcester Range, like which is one of our the Kingdom Heritage Trail up north of Island Pond, like those are like remote experiences. And so like you're thinking that you're surrounded by the big woods, you're like really out there. And I think one of the problems is like people are starting to think that they want that remote experience like in their neighborhood park or like, you know, their town forest. And I think what we need to say is like, this is the place for shared use. Like go to the top of the mountains for like that remote experience. And like here's the experience should be like us sharing this forest, like between forest economy, wildlife, people. Like there should be like variation in what people expect. And I think people need to be educated in order to know that. Like they need, like people just need to get out there and know that like this forest isn't old growth. Like,
Right.
like even if your like goal is old growth forest, like management can help it along to be more resilient, to be you know, to get those characteristics more quickly. So like those happening like where people are recreating most is like not the place. That is the place for management. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Question, in terms of, I think we hear a lot, like there's nuances, right? It's complex, like forest management isn't one size fits all. But you have maybe an outdoor recreationist for 5 seconds when they stop by the sign, right? Like what do you feel like has been compelling maybe in trying to capture that story as someone stopping in? I'm like hoping to like draw that out, like is there a place to have that message be amplified on social media or places where people aren't physically there? Does that make sense? Like how to like extrapolate some of the things
I
that are
think one thing is that it's, sorry, I know I just talked, but the first thing is fear. Like people are afraid that it's gonna ruin their trail experience. So like that's why like don't surprise people, like all this work that Abby and Ryan did to like beforehand. But then even afterwards, like having that sign there, I mean like in a place where people rest and like they might just look and like, oh, this was harvested, like this isn't that scary. Like so that's just like one thing that I think like takes the conversation you're talking about down a notch, is like just say like it might not be as scary as you think it is. However, there are some times when it's like appropriate to have a bigger patch or you know like that is a little scarier, and then you need to like then have that conversation. That's just like a first thing. It's like showing people it's not maybe as scary as they think.
I'm just thinking about like what, I mean, we looked in Northern Forest Center. I know you guys helped highlight that story at you guys have much bigger reach and more broadly across the region. Local papers too. I think it's funny, the people that come into Kingdom Trails, they love Kingdom Trails. The local community that our organization was founded to serve, we have some naysayers, and I think we have, you know, I have board members that are super ingrained with our local community and our market across the street. You know, just sitting there and having my coffee and chatting with people was also a way to share and, you know, kind of letting those, I'm sorry I'm using this word, influencers know. They're not influencers like social media, but those people that are staples in the local community, making sure that they were aware and knew what was going on and they can help spread the message to the engaged group. The other story, I'll let you talk in a second. The other story that we haven't mentioned that I like to share and that's on some of our signage is the jobs that are coming out of this harvest. You know, not just the logger and the, our forester, but we go down the chain. Like we have I can, if folks want to email me, I can share images of these signs, but we have one sign that does talk about like the chain of all the jobs that are in the, you know, everywhere to trucking, you know, that this wood is following. And I think that's another kind of avenue or story to share that can resonate with a specific group of people. Go Luke, you've been talking too much.
I'm glad that you brought up the word nuance, Kelsey, because I feel like we throw that around so much. We say what you just said is like forestry is super nuanced and forestry is super complex. What does that mean exactly? How do we take it one step further in that educational tool to convince somebody of something new about forests and forestry that they didn't know? Because just to say like, oh, it's nuanced and keep it super generic, like, okay, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but if I don't know anything about, if I don't have a degree in silviculture, like I didn't grow intellectually by being told like, oh, it's super complex, you wouldn't understand it, right? So I still think we haven't, as a community, been able to package any of that into a 10-second, you know, video, God forbid. It's my least favorite words, TikTok and Snapchat. Right? But how do we take, what's an example of something that's nuanced that we can put into 10 seconds?
I don't think you can put it into a 10-second thing because it's not one size fits all.
No, it's not. But you could, I guess you could do a quick video on like chokecherry or American hazelnut and the calories that provides for a wild turkey. Go ahead.
No, I mean, it's just like, because it depends on the forest type, right? And the landowner's goals, and the ground conditions, and the weather wind. So like what you would do on one property, wouldn't work silviculturally or with the landowner's goals on another property, right? Because if the landowner is just interested in hunting rough grouse, right, what are they gonna do? They're gonna put in like patch cuts or big groups, right? But if you have a landowner isn't interested in that, and they have a really nice northern hardwood site, or right, they might just be doing a thinning, which isn't necessarily gonna benefit grouse that much, you know, and so, I don't know. Just kind of food for, you know, it's like, I don't think you can, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the geopolitical point that you brought up about wood coming from somewhere else in the globe is a huge one. Like that's part of the nuance of forest management is if we don't cut wood in a heavily regulated state, then it's probably coming from somewhere where the working conditions are worse, or perhaps that wood is even illegal.
Or it's even like just the transportation costs, like in
Yeah,
CLT, right, you're talking about like a lot of woodlands or Doug fir. Well, it's coming from the northwest, right, so it's gotta get here somehow. And yeah, it's a stronger wood and it's beautiful, but it's like you're trucking it across the country.
Right. Got a tremendous carbon footprint, but only if the audience is even coming to the table willing to have that conversation. And if they're not, I think to your point about pro-forestation, I mean, like if I was executive director of Standing Trees, I would just go after developers. They're mad at the wrong people, right? Like forests do grow back. And if the developers that are building all these second and third homes for people that are absentee landowners, not even, you know, here most of the time, and probably heating it with fuel
Well,
oil.
there's no housing problem.
Okay,
I think that one of the ways to like describe nuance is just to focus on where you are, right? Like, so your examples of like the different goals, like even in Acton, which we have a large network that can do that, there's different types of cuts in the same network. So like, you're like, or in a town forest, like if, like depending on the stand, it could be like this one, like this is all about wildlife, and then you go and like most people aren't gonna own, you're going to reach most people if you have like permanent signage like more than once. So the nuance can come in like just like taking advantage of the place where you are and saying like, here is why we did this here, and here's the benefits, whether it's the economic benefits or the wildlife benefits or the forest health benefits. That's what I would do. So that it just makes it harder though, because you have to figure it out each time. Claire?
Yeah, I think there like is a lot of nuance, and I think for me, I do feel like kind of the big picture things, like there are a lot of people that just like, truly don't know, and they're not necessarily coming from this place of deep ingrained ideas. And I think like for me as someone that like is in the recreation space all the time and like knows about forests but like not a ton, I feel like I just needed someone to like tell me 4 times like, oh, this is private land and like this is a privilege for you to be on it, and like please don't go off the trail. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, like I've been told this. So I feel like that messaging around private land, and then also the just like sometimes it's a really nuanced like place-based, like here's exactly what's happening, here's where we're doing this kind of cut and cutting these things. But I think also the more general, just like some people just haven't even thought either way, they just assume cutting trees is bad. And I think some people are gonna dig their heels in if you're like, oh, actually like it's great to manage trees. But I think other people are just like, oh, okay, I like didn't think about that. And I think to your example, I live in Morrisville. And so I think there is.
I almost didn't say what town it was.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I think there's a lot of room, especially as there's like so much more tourism and more growth in that town. And I think a lot of Vermont towns for like private businesses, especially the ones that serve like that are renting out the bikes, that are like selling skis, selling bikes to both locals and tourists, to have more information like when they're selling things. I know I go to a lot of local stores, and sometimes I think there's room to like explain the ride with gratitude beyond just when you're on the trail, but like when you're in the adjacent town, or like in, like there's the rail trail now, like that is public land, but it's near private lands that you might also be recreating on. So I think there is room in those spaces where there isn't a specific example that like say like, wow, isn't it great we're on this like public land that's managed, and like there's these other things nearby, and like remember that you're on private land, and if you like you might see logging equipment, and you can give general, I think, information about why it's there. And I don't think everyone is going to buy into it immediately, but I think some people are just like, oh, now I've seen it, no.
And something we found at Kingdom Trails is that you just have to do it till you're blue in the face and keep doing it. Like, you have new people experiencing those forests every day. They're accessing it for the first time on the trail, or just walking around, and they're new. And so
Blue's a great
you can't-
color for some people.
You just can't assume that they know riding with gratitude or know the benefits of a timber harvest, so we just had to keep on saying. And you go to Cafe Lobby in Berkeley, and you go to the bathroom, and you shut the door, and staring back at you in the face.
Yeah, like I think I see that somewhere, and I'm like, there could be room to see that more.
Yeah.
And to have the town, like, not every town has a recreation coordinator, but some do, like, for the town to have, like, signage toolkit that you could then, you don't have to do work, but you could be like, hey, landowner, like, you should check with the town, and they could give you something, so that it's not
Yeah, that's
then
good.
also all of
Yeah.
the landowner.
That's right, having access to those resources.
Yeah. That is a good transition. Does anyone else have any remaining questions? I wanted to end on like a positive note that there is hope for you know, I alluded earlier about not yet, that this type of practice hasn't been professionalized or written down just yet. We really are making it up as we go, using both of our expertises from our worlds. And I don't think it's official, I can't say it yet. There's wonderful grant tours from the federal government. The grant agreements will be signed soon, but there will be some funding. It will be through FPR, and they'll be looking at finding some demonstration sites in the state. And Kingdom Trails is honored to be one of them, and we have a timber harvest coming up, but they're going to do just that. They're going to use these sites, open them up to the public so to share the story. And I think there'll be incredible education opportunities with this, and this will be hopefully geographically dispersed throughout the state, so it's not just KT heavy. They'll just be looked at as examples for everyone, that from the trail user to the trail manager to the foresters to the public. And I think our goal that will come out of all that is some uniform signage, are there some BMPs we can get down, that the Skidder Trail has to go, is that the right word, Skidder Trail? Has to go at a 90-degree angle over the mountain bike trail, and cross it as least amount of times as possible. Can we start to get something down on paper that can be used and spread out and everyone can look to? That is.
I think having access to that kind of stuff,
Yep.
making it easy for the contractors, landowners to get a hold of,
Yeah, have some communication
put
tactics,
there.
like one-pagers, for different audiences, so hopefully that is coming, and Christine wanted everyone to know that they have been recording the sessions, and everything in this discussion has been captured, and hopefully we'll help in that process for FPR to create some of that.
Here's just a quick thought.
Yeah.
So, over the years, we've been involved in discussions about public lands. And, and for me, I'm down near Rutland Southern National Forest. And so they've had a big, conversations about these areas in long term. So what would really be helpful, I had some conversations with some of the biking recreation community about, getting support for timber harvesting, but they were a little reluctant to jump on that bandwagon because they felt they were sticking their necks out.
Send them my way.
So and that's, I think, a place where, and when oftentimes they were gonna need new trails. And so, the little piece I'm talking about is it's down behind Chittenden Dams called the Telephone Gap. It's like 30,000 acres, and it's been a pretty hot button item locally, you've heard. Yeah, so, it's the kind of thing where a lot of folks that the more they understand, I think the better.
And I think that, the critical thing with all communication is that it goes both ways, right? So it's not just about educating people about what you think or what we think. It's about like hearing people's concerns and saying, like I said, some of it's fear that isn't based in anything, and some of it's like, oh, well, if that's your concern, like, we can move the Skitter Trail like this much farther and like alleviate that concern. Like you went out with the trail manager and like did that, like in real time, right? Like, here is a concern, oh, we can do this. Like, so, like with, like thinking about like the bike community, like saying like, it feels like we're sticking our head up, like our necks out, like maybe it's more like, okay, so like, let's talk about that, you know, like let's like step back from like us having a direct ask, like support us, right? To saying, okay, so like, why does it feel like that? What, like, can we like become a community together and then present, you know, like coming together rather than like one person saying, this is how I think you should do it, or right, this is how I think you should do it. Which is hard, it's like way harder.
But I think once we do get some of these stories down to share, it might be a little bit more comfortable to people, you know. I think it's easy for Kingdom Trails and me to say because we were founded on old logging roads, but you know, after that harvest, there's new trails, you know, there's so much.
Not too much.
Yeah, that's right, we have a forest plan. You know, we even, while they were in there, Ryan opened up the canopy a little bit more so more snow could fall on our fat bike trails for better grooming. You know, there are little bits and pieces, these are minor details, but that will make a huge difference to both industries, you know. I think it's, all about just that storytelling piece, I think.
I just don't understand in this world that we live in now where fossil fuels have proven to have had such a negative impact in the environment, and single-use plastics are so bad, and concrete's awful, and steel's awful, that wood, the original renewable resource that is abundant, and there's just so much of it, why it has become seen as such a bad thing to cut down a tree, it just kind of baffles me, and I don't know, you know, they have this, their message is just so clear, don't ever cut a tree down, cutting trees down is bad, and we just don't have a response of like.
Because the trees are in their backyard. They're not out there at the mining pits where they're getting all the iron, you know, and then it turns into the
Right,
steel
and
beams.
of course, the mantra is, if you grow trees, you're taking carbon out.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, yeah.
And one example of an easier story, my brother's a forester out west, and there's so much, you know, forest fires are a much bigger issue there. And so whenever there's some questions about cutting trees or trying to recognize that managing a forest is a complex situation depending on where it is and what you're trying to do, you know, he could just rattle off, well, you know, sometimes we set areas of the forest on fire. And then do controlled burns to best do whatever it is that the controlled burns are doing in that situation.
Right.
But so like, the role of avoiding bigger fires is like an easy story for selective things, but and it seems like we don't necessarily have that. We don't have, because we're not threatened with forest fires the same way.
And I think we're still recovering from the emotional damage of the 19th century when we did level our farm. Our country is still healing from that, you know, those events, which included grazing on top of the cutting of trees, and then, you know, in the 80s and 90s we had all this forestry and logging controversy in the Pacific Northwest, which is still front of mind for people in the environmental activist community. And then now, you know, what we're talking about, mountain biking, hunting, forest management, all in the same space, right? That's multiple use. That's the Forest Service's doctrine of multiple use. And throughout, you know, the 1960s, 70s, 80s, multiple use started to look an awful lot like multiple abuse, with oil drilling and cattle grazing on public land. And I think Northeastern environmentalists are looking at all those things that happened out west and saying, well, you know, with climate change now, like, what do we got to do to move the needle and to be, you know, do so much better than we've done in the past? And so forest management is a really easy target, especially when you can stick this kind of like druid identity on the preservation of trees. And, you know, now I love all this stuff out about the wood wide web, like trees have the internet underground, which is not exactly true, but there's lots of controversy about that. it's a very imperfect analogy. All of that coming together, I think, has really created this thing where people just do not want to cut a tree, but steel, plastic, concrete is, as you said, is the answer to that equation.
I love the extra added bonus of outdoor recreation and this marriage between forestry and the recreation thing, because this has not been included in the conversation together forever. It's kind of a new thing. And it's such an awesome thing that we've got. I mean, I love the term working lands, but it's almost like it misses the playing lands component within that. And it's just such a bonus to the whole thing when we're talking about the forestry side of things. It's like, but wait, you know, there's these awesome things happening like hiking trails and, you know, mountain biking, hiking, hunting, like all these other things that benefit from proper forest management and everything, so.
I think it's the Northern Forest Center who, maybe you guys adopt this term, but I use it a lot, the new working landscape. And I do, and outdoor recreation is a part of that, and that goes back to how I began this session with Pillar 5 and the Forest Future Strategic Roadmap. Is really about how the forest economy can connect to those Vermont communities and uplift them. It's that new, just perspective.
Yeah.
So how about the Green Mountain Club? Where they tuned in pretty well.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I mean, Mike DeBon is their executive director. He's a forester. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So, I guess we didn't mention it, but Vermont Trails and Greenway Council is the unified voice for Vermont trails, and that's motorized and non-motorized trails, FASA, KT, Catamount Trail, Green Mountain Club, all of them, the chapters. And even the Horse Council, I should never forget the Horse.
Horses, right. Forget about the horses.
And the Canoe Trail, and you know, there's, and the, where was I going with this? Just this unified voice for trails does exist in Vermont, and we very much are in conversation with each other and are learning from each other always, and we know our voices are stronger together, so keep close, and Green Mountain Club is absolutely a part of that. And we're grateful for them because they've been around forever, and we learn from them because they've probably experienced it well before any of us.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, it's a great session.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
guys. Thank you, panelists.